Hi, it's Janet Fitch, and this is Writing Wednesday. And of course, somebody starts to honk there impatiently as we start our Writing Wednesday. I thought I would start with talking about the weather. Now, I know we've talked about the weather plenty because it's something that writers always forget when they're writing, is they forget the weather. There is always weather. It's hot, it's cold, you need to take the time and note the weather. And usually this is a muscle that writers need to build. They just start in telling the story and they forget to notice, what time of year is it? What time of day is it? What's the temperature? Where's the light coming from? What do they hear? What's blooming? What sounds? You need to have a very good sense of the weather to put your readers physically into your story. And so, because it's the heat of August right now, I thought I would start with weather. Now, I keep a weather notebook, and what happens in the weather notebook? Here's an old one that I pulled down. The weather notebook. It's just I take some old notebook and rededicate it, and what you do is you go outside at various times of day, in various seasons, and you record what you see, hear, notice. The dimensions of landscape: look far away, look up close, notice where the light's coming from, notice the quality of the light, notice what the temperature is, and then put in a notebook, so organized by the year, so that when you're sitting in a room by yourself in a fairly tepid indoor situation, you always remember, like, what was August like? Hi. What was August like? What was August, whatever this is, the 21st of August? What is the 21st of August in LA like? And you just start recording details. You start with the date, the time of day. You don't know, 5 o'clock in the afternoon is going to be very different from 10 o'clock in the morning. Weekday is going to be different than a weekend. So is it Friday? Is it Sunday? Is it a Tuesday morning? And what is it that you're seeing? What is it you're hearing? What is it you're smelling? And really try to capture what strikes you most. I have gotten so much use out of this because when you're writing in January and you're writing about August, it is very, very hard to remember the details. But if you've done this work, if you created this notebook, if you work on it diligently, so it's hefty and has a lot of weather reports in it, you will be able to use that for the rest of your life. This is an investment in your writing, is developing these various notebooks that we've been talking about. So the weather notebook, I did one where we actually, one of these videos, we actually went outside and did this observation, but I'm going to talk more about my notebook and what I have gotten, what I get out of what I've already written. So this is an August 18th. Doesn't say the year, but it's a sunset. It's 6:45 p.m. and it's over San Onofre, which is a nuclear power plant down the coast. And the sun sets red over San Onofre. Looks like a nuclear blast. Well, as we're fighting cliche, we have to sit and pause and think, oh, can we use this or not? But this is recording. This is your notebook and not necessarily what's going to go in. It looks like a nuclear blast. It's a nuclear power plant, so it suggested itself. Then, like a red boat in a seamless sky sea, mood goes melancholic because you are part of the weather. Your mood and what your memory, what's stirred up by the weather and observing it, is part of the observation. So this stirred up a mood. So the mood goes melancholic. Night doesn't fall, it rises like delicately dyed sari silk. Now that I could use, definitely. Doesn't fall, it rises. All the secret scents release, scent, olfactor. The secret scents release. A flight of sandpipers yellow with the sun on their wings. 17 balloons take off, rising behind the hill like an animal giving birth one by one to a litter of 17 lighter-than-air piglets. I like it. 7:30, so obviously I sat and watched it for an hour and a half. 7:30, dropping into the sea. First ombrade, that kind of bleeding upward. Ombrade up from the ball. So we're actually talking about the sunset and what it looks like. First ombrade up from the ball, flattens, turns rectangle, then melting, looks like a nuclear blast, then faded old lampshade, then like a red pasha on a tuffet. It goes blue, yellow, reddish, blue, and the red ball of the sun. So that's an actual description of the sun at sunset. But here's another one. A cool, misty morning, 9:30 a.m. Misty, even drizzly. When I woke up this morning at 10 to 6, it was still dark, eerie, as the sun rises at this time and is usually glowing apricot over the indigo hills of Mount Washington and the long line of the San Gabriels. Instead, it was pitch black, cars still with headlights on. The day began without a clearly demarcated dawn. It just got lighter gray, and now the faint wind trembles in the bamboo, and I wonder if it's going to drizzle. It's English weather, moors and tweeds and nubbly sweaters in heather colors, blue-gray, dusty rose. It's men in knickers with their walking sticks, how'd you do, their pipes clamped between their teeth. So now I'm tripping out. Their dogs running ahead into the wet grass, hunting rabbits in the hedgerows and trains at Victoria Station, sallow school children in gray and blue plaid, their pale eyes without wit or mercy. The hills of Mount Washington, Glassell Park, are just a misty Whistler impression towards the nearby darker foliage. Industrial Europe, gray town squares in Germany, guild halls, wine gardens along the Moselle. I never did like white wine. Standing in front of Wilton Place Elementary School, now I'm going back to memories, waiting for the diesel-spewing bus to take me to day camp. Those mornings when you go to day camp and it's cloudy. So I'm a little, it takes me back to childhood. It feels like fall, but it's too soon for summer to be over. August 31st, another month and a half of summer, maybe two, before it's really fall here. It doesn't have the blueness of real fall. It's a fluke. I don't trust it. But it feels like a respite, a day out of time. So that goes to memory. The first one was pure observation. This one went to memory. Let's see one that goes dimensional. You notice details in these things that you will miss in 6 months. That's what I want to look for. Here's one: hot sweltering. This is August 14th, 1:50 p.m. Hot sweltering in high 90s and humid. Everybody's in a bad mood. Mother slaps her kid, says, "I'll break your arm," when the kid first wants to drive the car, then won't walk and has to be dragged. Two women shoving each other on the street. Everybody mad and looking for a fight. I wouldn't think of that when I'm writing a story. Here's a nighttime. High summer, 11:30 p.m., full moon. The gentle sounds of the freeway, light through the trees, shadow dance on the wood deck, or the hot clear night and the sound of trains. I believe I used this in a novel. Clear enough to water, but can't see. My mother in moonlight, how they'd taken moon baths. Oh, so now I'm fictionalizing this. My mother in moonlight, how we'd taken moon baths, and she would tell me the shadows on the roof of the house look like a smile. My mother would tell me stories about Diana, Artemis, the moon goddess. Yeah, so this I've completely gone into fiction. The wide white wall of the house next door, like an expectant movie screen. Distinction of form, no color to compete. Bristle cones of yucca, burst of Siberian iris. Always the sense of something not quite real, that imagination can carry you away. The sounds of the night birds, the breath of the night. Inhalando, whatever that meant, exhalando. Minalush sings to the moon, his changing eyes reflecting the changing moon. That's a Yeats poem. The cat hours. Dogs are wary. Venus like a beauty mark. Finally, the cool of the evening. Crickets and freeway and river. Moon river, same. Lights off in the pool. Everything is unfamiliar in moonlight. The sounds of the neighbors, click and whir of air conditioning. People coming home late, vulnerability of a night of poverty, making life an experience, cram it full. When I come home, I would not sleep on a full moon night like tonight. I'm a poet again, I hear more than I see. How to love, how to take moon baths, how to strip layers of convention and security, open up again. Sound of automatic sprinklers in the night, pots of a midnight touch, a dog walk, and mysterious nocturnal crunchings of leaves, squeals of brakes. Who of the neighbors is still awake? Who left the house at 6 a.m. and who is returning now? The frozen dance of the eucalyptus in the moonlight. So this is the kind of thing you look and you describe and you remember things. Like one of these had a summer where on the roof of the house, we live in a hillside, so the roof in the back is very low. And if you throw a wet rag on the rooftop, it dries all crunchy. And I'd written that down in one of these. And I wouldn't have remembered that. But because I'd written it down, it always is part of summers. When something dries in direct heat, it doesn't dry all nice and fluffy. It dries, crunchy hard. Or the way if you've missed a plastic a flip-flop, the way it bleaches the color and the plastic becomes very pale. I would miss that. So I advise, whenever the weather, especially whenever the weather is particularly vivid, to go out at different times of day and note where the light's coming from, how hot it is, what comes from your imagination, and the detail that you perceive. And if you have every month of the year, if you have all different times of day, you will have a very nice reference text that you can use that will be specific to you and your own metaphors and the things that catch your eyes. Very personal and is absolutely usable when you do your own writing, in a way that using other people's work, memoirs, and whatever is kind of spotty when it comes to the physical environment. And physical environment is so important. People sitting in a room, conference room, sweating, because the AC is out and it's August, and how that feels in your clothes to be so hot. This is what makes your fiction alive for the reader. The more you ignore the light, the more you ignore the temperature, the weather, the less real it's going to be. So I strongly suggest keeping a weather notebook, weather journal, and really keeping it as a reference that you can pull off the shelf while you're writing, and give form to the give physical form to the stories that you're writing. So one of the things I thought I would do is, here's what I'm Sayward's beginning a historical novel set in 1954 West Virginia. How do you get weather information for times past? Going through old newspapers and so on. I would just do the present era and extrapolate. And then you can also look at temperature charts and, how hot was it in the summer of 1954. But more important is, like, what is it in West Virginia in August, in the summer, at 2 in the afternoon? What do you see? What are you feeling? What does the sky look like? Is it oppressive? Is it blue? Is it fresh? Is it humid? Is there any wind? And then if it's very hot, like, you have character in the heat, and what does it feel like to be in that heat? Is your hair gone limp, or is it gone curly, or is popsicle dripping down your arms? You're sitting on the back step, spitting watermelon seeds or pomegranate seeds. What are you eating? What are you hearing? In the summertime, people leave their windows open, so every sound is magnified. You hear a lot more of the neighbors' music, and what are they playing? And insects are alive, and they make their noise, and they, move around. What kind of insects? Do we have black flies? Do we have butterflies? Do we have cicadas? Do we have June bugs? And somebody jumps when it lands on them. Always interact with things. Do you not sit outside because the mosquitoes are so thick? Interact. And then the smell of citronella, the smell of bug spray, the smell of your suntan lotion, the smell of, always something beautiful, something gross. Don't differentiate too much. Use your imagination. I had a student who was writing a World War I novel, and he had no sense of smell. I'm saying there's no smell in this. We're in World War I. In the battlefield, and there's no smells here. And he goes, well, I have no sense of smell. So it's like, okay, well, you have to imagine then. You have to think it through. What do they have for transport? Did they use, were they using, tour buses, or did they have horses? So it would smell like horses. It would smell like mud. It would smell like blood. What is, and then imagine or research, if you don't know what blood smells like, you can research that. What does it sound like? What are we hearing? If it's muddy, what's a slurp, slurp, slurp? I mean, that's historically accurate. Like, where you can find out. Was it raining in the trenches at Ypres? Was it summer when you're writing? Stones, wheels crunching over stones, people marching. Are they marching in good order? or are they kind of sagging? How tired are the troops? You can figure it out. So definitely, use your smarts. Here's a question. Any tips for setting weather in a dystopic or foreign setting? Well, it's the same thing. Foreign setting, you can know whether the climate is a wet climate, a dry climate, what time of year is it, how cold would it be. I mean, I wrote about Russia. I could track, and historically I knew that there were times where it went below 50 degrees below. What is it like to be at 50 degrees below? What does your face feel like? What do the hairs in your nostrils feel? Your eyes? What do they do when it's that cold? What does it look like? Foreign settings are easy. Dystopic, it's like any other kind of world building. You have to make decisions. If you want there to be nuclear, acid rain. Acid rain is going to be the weather condition of my book. You can read up on acid rain, what it does to plant life, what it smells like, what it does to the environment, and then you have to have it raining. And people come in and they're wet, and things smell wet, and so on. So if you pick a dystopia, weather can certainly be part of that. But what you have to do is make a rule and then stick to it, and refer to it and come back to, that wetness, or the fact that it hasn't rained in 50 years. And what would that be like? And what does it smell like? And what happens to the land? And what happens to the light and the dust? And then you have to keep it going, because landscape, like any other spell that you create, begins to fade as soon as you cast the spell. It starts to fade. So you have to remember to always, people come from the outside and they are covered with dust. So it's just like it's a real place. The more made up it is, the more real it has to be. So let's see if we have any other comments or questions. Well, I took some questions off. I've had people who have written questions to me, and I have not answered for some time. So I thought I would take some random questions, and then I'll be watching for your questions as well. Okay, let's give this a try. How can I write dialogue between two friends discussing about their studies? Okay, the important thing is that there is conflict. If there is no conflict, you don't need any discussion whatsoever. We sat down and we did our algebra, period. But if we want dialogue between two friends doing their homework, discussing the homework, it can never be about the homework. It's always about the relationship between the two people. So if they're discussing their studies, but the underlying is maybe, how could you be so stupid? And the other saying, well, you're not very good on a snowboard that I noticed, or, you still don't have a boyfriend. There's going to be underlying conflict. So be aware of what the conflict is, and then you can make your discussion about your studies something that's a real scene that will have conflict between the characters, and someone wins and someone loses. Can you write a story with no adjectives? Of course you can. It enriches the adjectives can enrich. They're there to enrich things. It's like you can watch a black and white movie, but every once in a while, to have a little bit of color is nice. So yes, you can. What can I do when I'm uninspired and need to continue writing my novel? What will motivate me? Sometimes I just say give it 15 minutes. Just tell yourself you're not going to write your book. You're not going to be working on your book. You're just going to go in and clean up some language. And usually by going in there and dusting it off, it 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 reconnects with you. Generally, the longer it's been since you've gone in there, the harder it is to get back in. So I'd say when you're uninspired, dust it off. The other thing is that most of us became writers because we're very excited about the things we've read. We become writers because we are excited by other writers, other writing. And there's always some books that I can go back to if I feel uninspired. I will go back and read some of Lee Young Lee's The Winged Seed. It's a memoir, but he's a poet, and it's gorgeous, and that always inspires me. The Lover by Marguerite Duras. I start reading that, it's like, wow, I gotta write. I'm in there. Lowry's Under the Volcano. Durrell's Justine, the first volume of or any volume of the Alexandria Quartet, always inspires me. Faulkner, I start reading, especially the Quentin chapter in the Quentin section in The Sound and the Fury, and then I have to write. I'm so excited. Reading about art and artists is always exciting, always energized me. To read Robert Henri's The Art Spirit, I find very inspiring, and Patti Smith's Just Kids, about her and Mapplethorpe as baby artists, that really, that's very inspiring to me. I tend to keep the books that inspire me right behind my desk for that very reason, because they always inspire me. Who is the best writer currently living today, in your opinion? I love that. There's so many great writers living right now. The best, the best. I don't know. The best writers living today. I mean, I would definitely put Joyce Carol Oates up there. I have, Toni Morrison just died, so she's suddenly out of the running. I would say definitely Joyce Carol Oates. I really, I find George Saunders just an incredible writer. God, Lincoln and the Bardo, just a spectacular book. And I'm slowly getting through short stories by him. I think Lauren Groff is incredible writing. I'm reading Florida, like kind of tearing it apart right now. And short story collection was amazing. Best writer currently living today. Oh, such a burden. And I might not even know them. I might not even know who the best writer living, because perhaps I've missed them in Japanese or in Italian or Swedish or, any, Hindi. I mean, I might have missed them. So tremendous writers. What is the key to Joyce Carol Oates? The key to Joyce Carol Oates is her unwillingness to step aside from a blow that's arriving. She is intrepid. The sentences are long and beautiful. I love her. I learned to write by reading Joyce Carol Oates short stories. The intensity and the beauty of the language, and the way she just pushes things, people, the violence, the intensity. I'm very attracted to her. And here are a bunch of good, really good recommendations. The Nickel Boys, good. Whitehead. But the greatest living writer, Yeah, I'll still go with Joyce Carol Oates. Uh, all right, what else do we have? What are the best techniques you know for writing and publishing a difficult personal story without identifying or upsetting family members or friends? Fiction. Write them as fiction and mix up their character so it's not just one person. It's kind of an amalgam of people plus yourself. See if you can find that ugly part of yourself that goes there as well. And write as fiction. Really fictionalize it. That's how you, for me, my mind, you can really not upset people as much as if you wrote a memoir. You can also make things happen where the way that will make it understandable to another person. Whereas sometimes your own personal story is so personal that it's hard for another person to really feel what it is that you are getting at. Whereas when you fictionalize it, you can enlarge elements, you can eliminate elements, and things can be much more clear why you have that motivation to write that story. How do you write a compelling villain that people can sympathize with? I love that. I do that. I believe in that. And you do it by remembering that nobody is a villain to themselves. Everybody has a reason for doing what they do. And that makes a compelling villain, because it's hard for a protagonist to really get a grip on somebody who's right like half the time, maybe even more than half. They're right even though they're horribly, horribly wrong in the larger picture or in their interactions, that they have a coherent reason for doing what they do. And in their mind, they are not villains, So that's always fun. Why is sentimentality considered a hallmark of bad writing? Well, I'm trying to remember whose quote this is. Somebody said that sentimentality is the working off on yourself of emotions you haven't really got. Oh, people who are really basically selfish and uncaring, but they can get very teary-eyed over a Thomas Kincaid postcard. I think that in general, sentimentality is unearned emotion. Melodrama and sentimentality come from the same place. It's unearned emotion. If we want a feeling of tenderness, you have to do more than put in a fuzzy kitty. That's cheap. It's cheap and it's unearned. And it's kind of like adding artificial flavoring in a gourmet meal. You do not add artificial flavoring. You actually create from the materials that you have. What's next? What's the right way for me to write robot characters in my story? Well, you ask yourself, what's the difference between a robot? What are going to be your world building? So you have to ask yourself, what is going to be the essential difference between your robot and a person? I mean, if you read Philip K. Dick, Scanner Darkly, or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, right? Blade Runner was based on that. I mean, his androids were incredibly human, and they were being treated as machines, and that was really decommissioned whenever somebody thought that they should be. I mean, it developed a whole series of ethical problems. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of a story are you writing? How deep do you want to go here? Robot characters can be written simply as extension of your cell phone. I mean, they can be just completely machines and should have no more attention paid to them than your cell phone. But if you want to start exploring what is a person, which is obviously what these, speculative fictions and science fiction projects, when they talk about androids or they talk about holograms, they talk about robots, they're exploring what is it to be human by looking at these other forms. And that is very interesting. So if you really want to get into your robot character, then think about that. Isn't there a sci-fi iRobot? I'm trying to remember who did it. I think it's probably Dick. And use it to uncover some things that will be very interesting to explore. What are your five top excuses for not writing? I love that. What helps you get past the resistance? Okay, my 5 top excuses for not writing. And if you guys have any of your top reasons for not writing. Distraction, just too many things to do. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. Urgent. The urgent, but not. We've talked about time management. Important and urgent. Urgent, not important. Not urgent. Important, not urgent, and not important, not urgent. So we tend to spend all our energy in the top half, on the things that are important and urgent. Important meaning will lead you to your goals. Urgent meaning, we need to do them. And urgent but not important. All that laundry, picking up the laundry, and the electrician's coming tomorrow, and blah, 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 blah. We get very caught in that urgent but not important. The lower left is important but not urgent, which is your book, which is the thing that's going to lead you to your goal. So all that urgent but not important is generally my excuse for not writing. And what I do is I focus down onto the important but not urgent and make sure that every day I deal with that important but not urgent, because only you can take care of this, and see how much of that other category I can put off, or that I can hire somebody to do, exchange something, if you do this, I'll do this, and not run around doing that first, doing the urgent, but doing the important thing first, the writing, care of the humans, and seeing, eventually everything gets done, but it's not as urgent necessarily as you think it is. There was a question up here. If my primary characters are children, does it mean my book is YA? No. Are there some subjects taboo in YA? I don't think of it as taboo so much as thinking about the moral task of the YA book. The primary characters are children. That can be a very adult book. That can be a very third-person children, talking about them from a certain distance. Things can be happening that they do not understand, that's happening all around them. That is not a children's book. Bastard Out of Carolina was not a children's book. YA it's the writing itself, the clarity of the issues in YA. It tends to be very clear. Adult fiction is much more complex, and it deals with its problems in a more complex way. There is often no clear good or bad. It's not clear. It's a mess. It's a mix. And adults have to bring their moral sensibility to the task of deciding what is good, what is bad, what would I do, what would I not do. And that exercising of that muscle, that ethical judgment, is what makes literature so profoundly important. But a teenager needs a little bit of more clear-cut ethical problem. They can be very disturbed and confused when there is no the clarity is of messiness and the muddiness and the compromise and the emotional difficulty, the ethical difficulty is too difficult. I don't think there are subjects taboo in YA, but adults suffering their adult problems is probably not going to be as much of interest to that age group. That'll tend to be adult literature. Let's see, is there anything else? Tips in writing historical fiction. Well, that's a broad question. My biggest tip right off the top of my head is know your subject, have a research generally, but while you're writing it, try not to follow the rabbit down the rabbit hole. Stay pretty close to, when you're doing your research, stay pretty close to the subject matter under your hands. So if I'm writing about August 1919 in the Civil War behind lines, I should stay pretty close to what I need to write that chapter. That if I find out something really cool, it's like, be very careful of following that rabbit somewhere else. That's my biggest tip for historical fiction, is staying close to your original story. So here's another question. How would you write a character motivated by boredom? A character, I could see that, especially somebody who is very impulsive, and the kind of things that they do out of boredom. They could, you could murder somebody out of boredom. I think that's what happened with Loeb and Leopold. They had excess computational energy, and they used it. They amused themselves by killing another kid. That could be very dangerous. What was the most challenging work you've written, and why? They're all challenging in a different way, but I'd say that these last, Marina M. and Chimes of Lost Cathedral, were the most challenging works, because I'm creating a world that's unfamiliar to the reader, the Russian Revolution, at the same time as I'm creating a world as well as creating the dramatic interactions of a character. So that was extremely challenging. It used to be, have a couple of people in a room talking is about as big a world as I could get. And this time I had, lots of characters, big scenes, big environments to be created, history to be followed. Yeah, it was very challenging. Diverse characters. How do you prepare for accusations of appropriation? Well, I am a great believer that anybody who conceives of a story should be able to write that story. And the further it is from the author, the more of a responsibility the author has to get it right. So any story is open to you, but you better get it right and really do your research. And if it's about a small group of people, that you aren't a member of that group and they're available to interview, definitely talk to people. Let them look at what you've done or talk about what you've done and make sure that you've got it right. So just keep that person on your shoulder. Keep a person, if you're writing about a person very different from you in a different ethnicity, a different religious group, different something, imagine them right on your shoulder looking and going, are they going to be pleased? Maybe they won't like the portrayal, but, will they go, you don't know what you're talking about? Or will they go, yeah, that's pretty right. That's what you want. Yeah, so you want to watch Going Down the Rabbit Hole when you're, this is a question of the Appalachian story. You want to watch out going from one thing that you're researching to ending up, she was looking for Appalachian names and ended up searching for a woman I suspect died of TB in a sanitarium for more than an hour. She had nothing to do with my story. Yeah. And if you start putting that stuff in your story, you might have to go out and pull out a year's worth of work. So you have to be very careful in handling the research. Let's take another one. What famous writers and authors came from Chicago? I love this, the random questions on the internet. It's so cool. So I always think of Lee Young Lee as a poet and one of my very favorite writers, Chicago. Luis Urrea, who wrote The Hummingbird's Daughter and The House of Broken Angels. Chicago. Rebecca Mackay, The Great Believers. It's out right now. Chicago. Alexandra Heman, Samantha Irby, a very funny, I guess you would call her an essayist, personal essay. And she is so funny and so real, and just, she suffers with all kinds of stuff, physical, emotional, and manages to be really funny and really heartbreaking all at once. And if you haven't read Samantha Irby, you must read her. Saul Bellow, I'm trying to think of people who are alive. But yes, Saul Bellow, Gwendolyn Brooks, the poet, really important. Nelson Algren, Ray Bradbury, our own LA's Ray Bradbury was from Chicago, as was Philip K. Dick and Dave Eggers, Hemingway, Scott Turow, he's a monster in a good way. Shel Silverstein, the poet, Carl Sandburg, lots of people from Chicago. It's great. What is the most relaxing thing to write about? I love this story, this question. The most relaxing thing to write about. I find the most relaxing thing to read about is, I read that Marie Kondo, The Art of Tidying. I'm not a super tidy person. You can see I'm not exactly the minimalist. I'm sort of like, I like my stuff. But sometimes you feel overwhelmed, and just reading about tidying for me is relaxing. So if I have my character scrubbing down the lice-ridden whatever in The Revolution of Marina M., or cleaning diapers, or the kids' diapers in Chimes of Lost Cathedral, there's something about cleaning that, and I am not a cleaner, but it's very relaxing. Have a wonderful afternoon. So let's see, one other question. Let's see what we've got here. What is the general difference between the writings of a native English writer and a non-native English writer? This is really an interesting issue. When you're writing in a language not your own, you're often not recognizing when things are cliche because you don't read enough in that language to know, that this is a tired expression. Sometimes we find them charming, and then everybody else will go like, seen that before. Think about what language you are most proficient in. and decide whether your English is really up to writing fiction in English. If it is, you understand that the sound of your own native tongue will be in the book, whether you like it or not. The cadence, and you can use that to advantage. I just read Ocean Vuong's On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous, and there is the lilt, and he is a beautiful English speaker, but there's a sound of the Vietnamese, and it's not a bad thing, and he uses it, and as a poet he uses it. But I have also seen students who are their spoken English is good, the written English is not yet ready for publication. And I find working with them, if you use a tool like Grammarly, please write down what it corrected and keep that and look at the difference and study it and develop a textbook of your own problems and solve those problems. Don't just use a corrector, because you never get any better. It's interesting, I read last night with a guy named Leland de la Dorante, and he studied in Italy, is very proficient speaker, and he writes in academic papers and stuff. But when he wrote a novel, he was amazed when he read the translation in Italian how beautiful it was and how much better it was than what he could have done. So if you find that you're not coming up, it's a weird thing, I think that the inflection of another language in English makes it interesting. But you can't be making the reader stumble over your stuff. Sometimes it's more playful. If you read Nabokov's English, he plays with writing in a way that a native speaker would not, because he's a toy to him. It's a charm, it's not something that he knows the rules and trots them out. It's something that he might want to play with. So it's it's an interesting topic. It's a big topic. Many Russians, I was about the writing about the revolution, and many of the Russians who emigrated wrote in French instead of Russian, because there was a wider publication. And I bet that French is inflected with the Russian, and it's probably really interesting. Have Marina and Chimes been translated into Russian? No, not yet. But anybody wants to, any publisher wants to try it, go ahead. So that's a good place to end Writing Wednesday. Thank you for joining me. And next week, who knows? So if you have a burning desire to hear me talk about some aspect of writing, please include it in the comments. All right. Thank you very much. Bye.